After enduring a tumultuous few years during the PS3 360 generation, the past decade has seen Capcom fully reclaim its place as one of the games industry's greatest third-party publishers, and a large reason for that has been their consistently strong output of Resident Evil games, arguably since 2015 with the often overlooked but very good Revelations 2, but for most gamers, since 2017's Resident Evil 7, which put the mainline series back on track after the tepid reception to the overly bloated Resident Evil 6, a game that put off long-term fans by leaning too far into the action side and completely losing any semblance of Resident Evil's survival horror roots. But ever since Biohazard, the Resident Evil series has been on a killer streak, with Village, the exceptional Resident Evil 2 and 4 remakes, and yes, while not up to the standards of the remakes it was sandwiched between, I even enjoyed the hell out of the Resident Evil 3 remake as well. Resident Evil is a top 3 video game franchise for me, and at this point, I have full faith in current day Capcom's handling of the series, so I'll be there day one for any new Resi game they put out. But while I've thoroughly enjoyed the new first-person era of Resident Evil with Biohazard and Village, and the shake-up to gameplay those games offered that led to the scariest moments of any Resident Evil games, as well as the revelations, no pun intended, that 7 and 8 had for the lore of the Resident Evil universe, I can't lie, Requiem seeing the return of, let's be real, the single most iconic Resident Evil character, Leon S. Kennedy, as a playable character once more, definitely raised my excitement level for Requiem a notch higher than the last few games. And while I had my concerns about Requiem's pitch of marrying both of Resident Evil's major gameplay pillars by splitting your playtime in RE9 between two protagonists, having Leon's sections offering action-heavy gameplay akin to Resident Evil 4 through 6, and newcomer Grace Ashcroft's sections provide a more slow-paced survival horror experience in the vein of Resident Evil 7, 2 and 1, as I thought this could lead to a disjointed experience that gives you tonal whiplash as you jump back and forth between the two styles of gameplay, but it really doesn't. This best of both worlds approach works wonderfully, with these two styles of gameplay juxtaposing beautifully in Requiem, with Grace's sections delivering an intense, harrowing atmosphere as you slowly skulk through dank, grimy environments, feeling like you're on the verge of death at any given moment, while Leon's provide cathartic stress relief as you effortlessly tear through areas, casually blasting away the monstrosities that tormented you for hours during Grace's segments with no hint of fear whatsoever. And in the process, Requiem delivers the best action to horror balance we've seen in a Resident Evil game yet. 9 mainline entries in, well, 11 if you're counting Code Veronica and Zero, which, let's be honest, are pretty much mainline games, Resident Evil shows no signs of losing steam, as Requiem not only keeps Capcom's golden streak going, but provides one of the most compelling Resident Evil experiences in the series' 30-plus year history. After moving away from the multiple protagonists set up in recent entries, it's back in full swing for Resident Evil 9, though not in the same way as earlier entries. Requiem doesn't have separate playthroughs for the two characters, like the A-B paths of Resident Evil 2. Instead, it flows more like the Revelations games, where Grace and Leon share one interconnected story in which you switch back and forth between the two at set intervals. And our two protagonists in Requiem are pretty much the antithesis of one another. Our newcomer protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, is an FBI analyst and the daughter of journalist and lockpicking expert Alyssa Ashcroft, one of the playable characters in the oft-forgotten Resident Evil Outbreak games. So it's a nice touch that Capcom managed to tie those games into mainline canon with Requiem. Grace is your Ethan Winters type protagonist, roped into something far above her pay grade as someone who primarily works a desk job, now trapped in a nightmarish journey where she's fighting for her life, utterly terrified as she's forced to fend off zombies and survive being hunted by all manner of mutant monstrosities. All because Grace's boss decided to send her to investigate a crime scene that just so happens to be in the now abandoned hotel where Grace witnessed her mother's murder 8 years prior. Side note, this man is a terrible boss. You cannot be sending your employees to the site of the most traumatic event of their life because you think they should confront their past. Come on, man, you're her boss, not her therapist. You can't be out here prescribing exposure therapy for your subordinates like this. Just send someone else. Of course, our second protagonist is someone who needs no introduction to Resident Evil fans, and dare I say gamers in general, Leon S. Kennedy, the protagonist of my two favourite RE games, 2 and 4, as well as one of the protagonists of 6, but don't hold that against him. His campaign is at least the strongest aspect of Resident Evil 6. And you know what? Shout out to his partner in 6, Helena Harper, an underrated character who still deserves another appearance in a better game. But I'm getting sidetracked. I did warn you that Resident Evil is one of my favourite franchises, so be prepared for the odd diatribe here and there. The Leon of Requiem isn't the rookie cop we met all those years ago. Far from it. This is a 50-ish Leon who's been fighting his way through outbreaks of viruses and slaying bioorganic weapons for 30 years now. This is just another day for him, so he feels cool and in control no matter what is thrown at him, spin kicking, shooting, and slashing his way through every obstacle put in front of him. This is peak action hero Leon, and he is loaded up with more ridiculous one-liners than ever. I loved seeing the conversation circulating around Twitter surrounding the release of Requiem about whether Leon could survive the world of The Last of Us, which is an insane thing to ask. Not only would this Leon survive The Last of Us, but he'd have that world fixed in about a week flat. Requiem manages to give us a convincing reason for Leon to be pulled into this story. In the opening minutes of Requiem, we learn that the case that Grace was investigating when she was dragged into this chaos involved the discovery of a string of dead bodies with black bruising all over them, with these victims all sharing one thing in common. They were survivors of the Raccoon City incident, who have been living perfectly normal lives for the past 3 decades, only to die after something lying dormant within them all this time began to surface, meaning that not just Leon, but everyone who made it out of the original trilogy of games is potentially living on borrowed time if they can't get to the bottom of this new outbreak of disease. Therefore, Raccoon City itself plays a significant role within Requiem, and is back front and centre in the world of Resident Evil for the first time in many years. From the trailers, we knew that Requiem would see Leon making his long-awaited return to the now bombed-out Raccoon City, and while I won't discuss any specifics about why Leon is drawn back to Raccoon City, or the location he visits during his time in Raccoon City this time around, as these deeply nostalgic moments are better savoured for yourself, I will say that I think the inclusion of Raccoon City in Requiem feels like far more than cheap fan service. In the hands of lesser devs, many of Requiem's moments would have read like cheap member berries bullshit, but they never do here. The way Requiem plays off and ties into the legacy of this franchise feels earned, because Capcom has shown so much restraint over the years. They could have taken us back to Raccoon City as Leon 20 years ago, but they didn't, so revisiting this iconic location now feels all the more special, because Capcom haven't burnt their nostalgia plays like most other studios have. In many ways, Requiem feels like a sequel to Resident Evil 2, so I'd recommend at the very least playing the RE2 remake before this, and it would behoove you to have played 1 and 4 as well. Obviously, the more Resident Evil games you've played, the more you'll get out of Requiem. Certain moments just aren't going to hit as hard if you don't have any history with Resident Evil. And I'm glad I've played every Resident Evil game leading up to this, because Requiem does feel like something of a culmination. Resident Evil Requiem puts so much care into recreating prior locations, without giving away the specifics. In Raccoon City, you retrieve an item from the exact place you left it 30 years earlier in the timeline in Resident Evil 2. There's no other franchise that has a legacy that it can and does play off quite like Resident Evil does. While the core story of Requiem is certainly not in the upper echelon of video game stories, let's be honest, Resident Evil games never are. They're at their best as just campy, goofy fun, with some surprisingly compelling lore sprinkled in, and that's exactly the pocket Requiem finds itself in. It's exactly the story it needs to be for a Resident Evil game, with its main purpose being to move you from location to location to let the game's excellent level design and staggeringly beautiful art direction shine. However, that's not to say that Requiem's story doesn't have some meaningful implications for the greater Resident Evil world, and Requiem does leave us with some fun, unresolved mysteries to chew on and speculate about until we finally get some answers in either Requiem's DLC or Resident Evil 10. I was always quite critical of Ethan as our protagonist in the last 2 games, as he was quite a vanilla, forgettable character, and Requiem's duo of protagonists are certainly a marked improvement. While Jill gives him a decent run for his money, Leon is and always will be my favourite of the Resi protagonists, so to no one's surprise, I was very pleased to have him once more brought to the forefront here. And this is one of the strongest depictions of Leon we've seen yet, thanks to a solid performance by Nick Apostolidis, who reprises the role of Leon after previously playing him in the Resident Evil 2 and 4 remakes. This is honestly a pretty picture-perfect portrayal of a late-career Leon in my eyes. He's the charismatic badass who still has an air of goofiness to him, with his endless quips and one-liners, which leans into the inherent campiness that's been prevalent throughout the entire Resident Evil saga. You don't become one of the most iconic faces in gaming for no reason, even if Leon may not be the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, in the second Leon section of Requiem, the man chainsaws through the deadbolt of a door that's on the side of the door he's on. Why would you do that? Just open it, dude. Our other protagonist, Grace, proves to be a serviceable new addition to the Resi roster too, though I do think the direction her actress was given has led to a performance that comes off as a little overacted and hammy, even by Resident Evil standards. I get that she's meant to be a character who's somewhat inexperienced and is an anxious person due to her past trauma, but the way Grace stammers through practically every sentence she speaks in Requiem feels borderline comical. Obviously, when you're anxious, you're going to fumble your words, but not like this. Having her stutter through literally everything she says makes the dialogue feel clumsy, unnatural, and overly scripted. Grace talks like a fucking Scooby-Doo character, for Christ's sake. But look, I don't want to come off as too harsh, because I do think that even with these complaints, Grace is a notable step up from Ethan as a protagonist. I just wish that her dialogue was written and delivered a little better, because Grace's backstory and motivations are compelling. So there's a world where she could have been in the upper echelon of Resi protagonists if she was handled a bit better. Requiem also brings some other fun new faces into the fray with its villains, the most prominent of which is our overarching antagonist, Dr. Victor Gideon, who's orchestrating the chain of events in Requiem. Gideon's mad scientist archetype is the perfect fit for the Resident Evil series. Gideon is an awesome, campy, and at times unnerving antagonist, and he's got a phenomenal design to boot, clad in a filthy old research jacket and rocking a set of telescopic goggles. You know from one look that this guy is a top-tier Resident Evil freak show, and from the moment Leon is introduced to Gideon as he carries off an unconscious Grace while nonchalantly firing a dart gun into the pedestrians of a crowded street, turning them into zombies to create a diversion for Leon to deal with, I was immediately compelled by the cold, calm, and imposing presence Gideon brings to Requiem. Requiem also offers up an interesting secondary antagonist in Zeno, but I won't say too much about him as he wasn't showcased in Requiem's marketing to the same degree that Gideon was. While not some revolutionary antagonist who stands among the greats of the series, Zeno is a solid addition to the cast who opens up some fun opportunities to speculate on his origins due to the parallels Zeno shares with a certain important figure from Resident Evil's past. The Resident Evil series has explored many different perspectives in its gameplay over the years, from the fixed camera angle setup of the OG PS1 trilogy, Zero and Code Veronica, to the over-the-shoulder third-person action of Resident Evil 4, 5 and 6, and finally to the slower-paced, gritty, grounded first-person gameplay found in Resident Evil 7 and 8. Requiem unites a couple of these styles of gameplay, offering you the option to play through Requiem in third person or first person, letting you select your preferred camera perspective for both Leon and Grace separately. By default, Requiem recommends that you play Grace's sections in first person and Leon's in third person, and after dabbling with every possible configuration, I do think that this is the ideal way to experience Requiem, because Leon's action-heavy gameplay, filled with fast movement, melee counterattacks, and stylish finishes, doesn't lend itself to first person. When a character has a moveset as crazy as Leon's, you want to see them, so you can appreciate all the stylish animations as he kicks zombies, stomps in heads, and casually sidesteps enemies before popping them in the head at point blank range in one of his flashy kill animations that you can trigger by attacking instead of parrying when an enemy lunges at you. Because of this, Leon's gameplay feels substantially worse if you try to play it in first person, and while Grace's gameplay controls perfectly fine in third person, it definitely lessens the tension of her gameplay segments. First person is inherently scarier. It makes you feel like you're fully inhabiting these spaces, and the limited spatial awareness gives Requiem a more intimate, claustrophobic feeling, which you largely lose in third person. So unless you're the rare person who gets motion sickness from first-person games, I think you're doing yourself a disservice by not going through your first playthrough with the recommended camera setup. While at first I wondered if it would be jarring to switch back and forth between two perspectives, because frankly, on paper it seems like it should be, it never is, feeling surprisingly seamless. As Leon and Grace play drastically differently from one another, your brain is trained not to be jarred by the perspective switch, and instead it instantly puts you in the right mindset for the section you're about to take on. Capcom has put a lot of thought into keeping Requiem balanced whether you're playing in third person or first person, implementing some thoughtful speed equalizers. For instance, when playing in first person, Grace's movement speed is a little slower, but if you play as Grace in third person, she can randomly trip and stumble while running, so as not to give you some crazy advantage when speedrunning the game in third person. The differences in personality between our two protagonists are highlighted further through their vastly different styles of gameplay. As I mentioned in the intro to this video, when Capcom was talking about Requiem offering a 50-50 split of action and horror, with Grace's gameplay being survival horror-centric, and Leon's being action-driven, I was a little concerned. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of faith in Capcom. They've been on fire for 9 years straight. But I could envision a reality where this idea leads to a game that feels messy and incoherent. But Requiem never does, with these two styles of gameplay never feeling at odds, but rather feeling complementary to one another, with Requiem building a nail-biting atmosphere in Grace's segments, which provide the deliberately paced, tense, and jump-scare-laden gameplay that made Resident Evil 7 and 8 great, as you slowly plod through disgusting environments, feeling utterly powerless, before hitting you with a huge cathartic release in Leon's Resident Evil 4 on crack gameplay sections, giving you a massive power trip as you mow down hordes of enemies with ease, blasting, hacking, and roundhouse kicking your way through every enemy in sight, with these enemies dropping so much ammo that you'll never be at a loss for bullets as Leon, the antithesis of the bullet counting of Grace's resource management heavy gameplay. And if Leon wasn't powerful enough, there's even some light stealth mechanics in Requiem, allowing you to creep around and silently pick off zombies before they ever become aware of your presence. Grace can also perform stealth takedowns on enemies, but unlike Leon, who needs nothing more than his trusty hatchet, which he can endlessly resharpen, Grace needs to craft a special injector to perform a stealth kill, so it's not a crutch you can rely too heavily on while playing as Grace. Requiem handily offers the best feeling combat of any Resident Evil game yet, and some of the most satisfying action gameplay in a game this generation. Whether you're blasting through waves of zombies with an assault rifle, popping pustules on a grotesque mutant with a shotgun, or blowing out an enemy's knees with a couple of shots from your pistol before charging in and finishing the downed enemy with a hatchet blow to the brain, Leon's combat feels phenomenal. The flow of combat in Requiem is just sublime, as you seamlessly alternate between weapons, picking off enemies with the pistol, before switching to your shotgun to quickly thin the herd, then parrying a charging enemy with your hatchet, and finishing them off with a swift melee combo. The moment-to-moment gameplay just feels so beautifully fluid in Requiem. Requiem's combat is only missing one thing: the Mercenaries mode to show it off in. Seriously, I need a Mercenaries DLC mode in Requiem yesterday. With Requiem's immaculate combat mechanics, Mercenaries would shine even brighter than it ever has before. The high-octane energy of Leon's gameplay in Requiem is the true realisation of what Capcom clearly wanted Resident Evil 6 to be. Requiem even had me thinking that it would be cool to see that game remade down the line. Don't get me wrong, it would need a lot of work in other areas, namely fixing the atrocious pacing and not having you repeatedly fighting the same bosses in multiple characters' stories, but if they nailed this style of combat in a 6 remake one day, I don't think it's beyond comprehension that that game could finally have its redemption arc and go from the most reviled mainline Resident Evil entry to a surprisingly compelling action game. Part of the reason Requiem's moment-to-moment gameplay feels so invigorating is due to its varied enemy encounters. After a few years of battling mold monsters, werewolves, and even a handful of vampires, Resident Evil Requiem brings back zombies as our primary threat for the first time since Resident Evil 6. But Requiem's zombies aren't the zombies you remember from the original Resi trilogy. Instead of the brain-dead zombies we're used to encountering, Requiem zombies are more akin to Romero's zombies, where they still have a shred of humanity trapped in their undead shell. So Requiem zombies will talk from time to time, and even repeat basic behaviours and routines that they did in life. One of the zombies is a housemaid, so you'll still find her in the bathrooms trying to clean, though she's less so cleaning and more making an even greater mess by smearing blood all over the place with her cloth. Another absolute tank of a zombie is a chef, so you'll find him pottering around the kitchen until he catches wind of your presence, while military zombies will blindly fire their guns all over the place. You might even hear a zombie mutter, "I'm sorry," when you kill them. This is an interesting approach that gives Requiem zombies a semblance of personality that you wouldn't normally expect to find in the grunts populating a Resident Evil game. And some of the zombies' personality traits even have a gameplay implication. There's a zombie who has a fixation on keeping the lights off and will scramble to the light switch to make it dark again if you flick the lights on. And you can encounter a couple of performer zombies whose singing, or screeching, will rally all other zombies in their vicinity to attack you. The team at Capcom has clearly put a lot of thought and care into the placement of enemies and the environments that contain them to create exciting encounters that provide plenty of room to experiment in combat. Whether that's something as simple as letting you shoot a grenade in a zombie's hand to splatter them across the room, or having a trio of zombies come through a corridor in file to give you the perfect opportunity to blow the heads of all three zombies clean off with one round of the Requiem hand cannon when they align, to something as intricately designed as having you fight your way through an overturned skyscraper where you can shoot out the glass panels from beneath the zombies' feet to send them plummeting to their deaths. Re-deaths. Requiem also offers up plenty of sturdier foes to contend with, having Leon once more face off against some chainsaw-wielding zombies, but he's a little better prepared this time than he was in 4. Not only being able to deflect the chainsaw with his hatchet, but even being able to turn the tables and get his revenge by picking up and wielding chainsaws for himself this time around. We also have a nice throwback to the GameCube Resident Evil remake, with Requiem's new equivalent to Crimson Heads, Blister Heads, with zombies resurrecting in this hardier form with a bright red head if you fail to destroy their body or blow their head off completely when you kill them. One of the coolest aspects about the zombies in Requiem is that they can even be pitted against one another. For instance, in one of the first environments you explore as Grace, you'll come across a blind zombie stumbling around carrying an IV holder. If you throw a bottle at another zombie, the blind zombie will hear it and will charge over to attack and kill that zombie without you having to waste any of your precious ammo. I'd have loved to see this idea expanded on and taken to the next level, because there are pretty limited implementations of it throughout the game, but the fact that it's even baked in to begin with is still pretty cool. Of course, a key pillar of the Resident Evil series, dating all the way back to the original Resident Evil 2, is the borderline unkillable pursuer enemies who relentlessly hunt you through environments, be it Mr. X, Nemesis, Jack Baker, or Lady Dimitrescu. These enemies have provided some of the most memorable moments of gameplay for every Resident Evil fan, and Requiem gives us a doozy of a pursuer enemy with its abomination known only as the Girl, a monstrous BOW experiment that stalks Grace throughout the first half of Requiem. The Girl is one of the most grotesque foes we've had to contend with in a Resident Evil game yet. Her absolutely hellish appearance, paired with the disgusting gurgling sounds she makes, which, fun fact, the actor portraying the Girl produced by gargling gallons and gallons of milk, makes the Girl one of the most off-putting entities I've ever come face to face with in a game. The first time I encountered the Girl, as Grace reaches down to pick something up, only for the Girl's lanky, elongated arm to stretch into view of the camera, it authentically made my stomach drop. And there's at least one other scene I can think of in Requiem that sent a genuine shiver down my spine the first time I witnessed it. At this point in my life, I've played so many horror games and watched hundreds upon hundreds of horror movies, and I'm normally the psycho sitting there blank-facedly through any jump scares a movie or game throws my way. So I always love it when a game gives me a true moment of unease, and Requiem certainly did just that. When you're walking through pitch black rooms with only the light coming off your lighter to guide you, and you catch a glimpse of the girl hunting you, it can be genuinely nerve-wracking, as you get that horrible feeling of being chased, with your only refuge from the girl being bright light. So whenever she spots you, you'll need to make a break for a brightly lit room, or scare her off with a Molotov cocktail to get a moment's respite. While I still think House Beneviento in Village holds the crown for most unsettling Resident Evil moment, Requiem's early encounters with the girl and a certain flashback sequence later on vie for a close second. And Capcom has continued to ramp up not only the horror, but also the gore during Grace's segments of Requiem. Within the first hour of Requiem, we've seen Grace jam a fire poker through a zombie cop's eyeball and witnessed a man have a plastic bag pulled over his head before having his throat slit in the hotel flashback we've seen heavily teased in Requiem's trailers. And the violence never really lets up from this point on, as we see people torn apart and faces being eaten by zombies, zombies left with jagged bones jutting out of blown off limbs, and brains exposed through chunks of their head torn off by gunfire. Needless to say, Requiem is not a game for those who don't do well with gore, but if you're a bit of a gore hound, you'll likely find yourself rather impressed by the implementation of gore in Requiem, as not only are Leon and Grace getting completely drenched in blood throughout the course of this game, but so are the environments. And just like a Bethesda game, the bodies of enemies will remain in place if you return to an area at any point in the game. Even the blood splatter remains intact. Even more impressively, this remains true even when switching between characters. So if you shoot a zombie in the head as Grace, splattering blood across the wall, this viscera will remain exactly the same when you walk through the area as Leon 2 hours later. While you'll be switching back and forth between the two protagonists throughout the entirety of Requiem, Leon's sections start out rather brief, and can even feel like a bit of a tease initially, but they become more expansive as the game progresses, with the first half of Requiem being dominated by Grace, and the back half focusing more heavily on Leon. With their two drastically different styles of gameplay, Leon and Grace naturally each have some unique gameplay mechanics to help them make their way through the world. As always, our two protagonists can combine herbs they find to make various healing items, but Grace is also equipped with the Blood Collector, which she can use to suck up blood from felled enemies, or from the countless buckets full of blood that have been conveniently left laying around environments. And she can then use this blood as a crafting material, which when combined with the scraps she finds laying around the environment, can be used to make ammo, knives, and even stabilizer injectors that permanently improve Grace's aim and gun damage, and steroid injectors that increase her health like red herbs would in prior games. While Leon can find various gunpowders to make extra ammo for your preferred weapons, and you've got plenty of room to stock up on ammo as Leon, as he starts the game with dozens of inventory slots worth of storage, and can even expand his storage grid further in the second half of Requiem, whereas Grace, being your more classic survival horror protagonist, starts with just 8 inventory slots, slowly increasing her storage space by 2 slots at a time, as she finds storage pouches throughout the game, meaning you're very limited as Grace in the early hours of Requiem, and forced to carefully consider what you pick up, only ever carrying what's absolutely necessary, or tossing everything else in your storage box. Leon's biggest mechanical gimmick is the bracelet he eventually finds in Raccoon City that nets him points whenever he kills zombies, which can then be spent on new weapons, weapon modifications, body armor, ammo, and more. I heard someone say that they felt like the addition of the bracelet came out of nowhere and thought it was the result of Capcom gelling 2 games together, as we know RE9 was rebooted and shifted course at some stage of development. But I've got to staunchly disagree with this. I think the placement of the bracelet is fully intentional, because Capcom designs the Resident Evil games to be highly replayable. No Resident Evil game is designed to be played just once. It's why post-game unlocks have been such a core staple of the series from the beginning, and in subsequent playthroughs, Leon has the bracelet from the jump, allowing you to spend points on buying and upgrading any weapon you want from the start of the game, and as a result, you can have some of the best weapons in this game unlocked by the end of the first Leon section from your second playthrough onwards. This means that in your repeat playthroughs, you're not wasting time and currency on upgrading weaker weapons like you likely did in your initial playthrough. And just like prior Resident Evil games, Requiem also allows you to purchase bonus unlocks with credits earned for completing challenges that make repeat playthroughs quicker and easier, offering everything from special weapons to an unbreakable knife for Grace, an unlimited ammo toggle, and an infinite ink ribbon, which allows you limitless saves on the higher difficulties that would normally require you to find an ink ribbon to save your progress like you did in the original Resi trilogy. So beating Requiem for the first time is only the start of your journey if you want it to be. All up, I played through Resident Evil Requiem 4 times in my pursuit of the platinum. One normal playthrough where I took my time and really soaked in the experience, a second to get all the collectibles, a third where I speedran the game in under 4 hours without using the blood collector or any healing items, and finally a playthrough on insanity difficulty. And as you become more and more proficient at making your way through the game, you'll shave hours off your playtime. My first playthrough of Requiem took 9 hours and 50 minutes. My final was under 3 hours. Beyond its stellar combat, Requiem also deserves endless commendation for its masterful level design. The care centre that serves as the primary setting for the first few hours of Requiem is an extraordinary environment, arguably among the finest in the entire series. It's such a masterfully designed map, with all the locations cleverly interweaving into each other as you open up countless shortcuts and locked doors to navigate the different wings more efficiently and better avoid the nasties that patrol them, which I guess shouldn't come as a surprise, as this kind of intricate level design is something that the Resident Evil series has done well all the way back to the Spencer Mansion in the original Resident Evil. Requiem offers a good amount of variety to its locales, from city streets to the hotel to underground tunnels, and we have a more sprawling open area this time around with Raccoon City, which once more I won't talk too much about as it's just too spoilery due to the nostalgic basis of it and the fact that this section is in the latter half of Requiem. You can also likely venture a guess at some of the other locations you might stumble into in the final hours of Requiem, as it does include some staple environment types that we see in nearly every Resident Evil game. Requiem's environments are also home to scores of collectibles. Would it really be a Resident Evil game without hundreds of notes scattered around, detailing the stories of people's downfalls, and giving us tidbits of info on whatever virus is ravaging any given location? We even have the return of a classic collectible this time around, because if we're playing a game that takes us back to Raccoon City, we need a new lineup of Mr. Raccoon bobbleheads to smash. What impresses me the most about Requiem's environments is that there isn't really a dud area among them. Nearly every Resident Evil game has a weaker area that's not as enjoyable to play through, especially upon replaying the game. In 2 it's the sewers, in 7 it's the boat, and in Village it's the factory. But there's nothing quite like that in Requiem. Yes, some locations are stronger than others, and naturally everyone will have their favourites, but there's no environment in this game that I truly hated or found a slog to get through. There is one highly scripted section towards the end of Requiem that requires you to hide and wait for enemies to pass, which can be a little annoying when speedrunning the game, but it's still a cool little set piece, and it's ultimately only about 5 minutes long once you know what you're doing, so it's much briefer than the down points of prior games. Another key tenet of the Resident Evil series is its environmental puzzles, and the puzzles contained in Requiem are mostly familiar territory, often revolving around finding keys and emblems to unlock doors, gathering electrical fuses to raise gates, or searching for codes to open safes and cabinets. There are a couple of novel little puzzles, like the one that requires you to take a pencil and shade a page of a notebook to highlight the indentations of what was written on the prior page, but most of the puzzles here are pretty by the numbers, and none of them are going to leave you scratching your head for too long. The Resident Evil series is no stranger to big action set pieces, especially in the modern era, and Requiem is no exception. In fact, Leon has one set piece in the tail end of the campaign that is so wonderfully stupid that it might be the most bombastic and ridiculously over-the-top Resident Evil set piece yet, and I adored every second of it. Right before I got to this section, it was around 1 AM, and I was about to finish the area I was in and turn in for the night. But once this set piece kicked off, I was so locked in that I just had to see what happened next, so I ended up playing for another 2.5 hours. I just love that feeling when a game truly has its hooks in you like that. The final thing I need to highlight is just what a feast for the eyes Requiem is. When I'm playing a game I intend to make a video on, I keep a notebook next to me to jot down notes about the game and things I want to remember to bring up in the review. The literal first note I wrote down about Requiem was, "Holy shit, this game is stunning," and it truly is. There are few games with such a high degree of visual fidelity across the board. From the impeccable facial animations, to the lifelike cloth physics on curtains blowing in the breeze, and Leon's shotgun swinging from side to side while strapped to his back, to the awe-inspiring lighting, with light realistically bouncing off of reflective surfaces as you slowly scuttle through environments, guided by only the flame of your lighter. And there are so many intricate, bespoke animations for both of our protagonists, like Leon holding his torch between his head and shoulder as he reloads his gun, or Grace tossing her torch between hands after aiming her pistol. From the prologue alone, I was awestruck by the visuals of Requiem. This scene sees you walking through the city streets as Grace, and it is one of the most lively and realistic feeling metropolitan areas I've ever walked through in a game. The set dressing is immaculate, with detailed storefronts with lifelike signage, construction workers on the job, and countless people just walking the street going about their business, talking to one another or on their phones, with you picking up fragments of their conversations as they pass by. With a series as long-running as Resident Evil, it's truly impressive that Capcom still manages to maintain such a consistent bar of quality over 30 years on from the first game, with only a few missteps along the way. And Requiem, in many ways, takes the franchise to new heights, with its masterful level design, impeccable balance of horror to action, and best-in-class combat. The Resident Evil series has been a top 5 game franchise for me since I was a teenager, and there are so many games in this series that I utterly adore. So it really says something that after 4 playthroughs, I can say that Requiem is unquestionably a top 3 Resident Evil game for me, sitting right up there alongside Resident Evil 2 and 4. Requiem is the best survival horror game of this generation, and a shoo-in for a 2026 Game of the Year nomination. As always, thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming review of Pragmata, or Pragmata as they say in the game. Until next time, be well guys.